Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 26 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll learn about a few more date and time functions that are available. Specifically, we'll be talking about IsDate, day, month, year, and DateName functions. And finally, we'll look at a practical example of using all these functions together. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch part 25 of this video series. Now, in the previous part, we have seen the different date-time data types that are available in SQL Server. Depending on the requirement of our project, we choose the date-time data type that's most appropriate. For example, if I want to store just the date part, then I use the date data type. On the other hand, if I want to store the date, the time, including the offset information, then I will choose DateTime offset. Okay, so basically these are the different data types that are available in SQL Server. Look at this. If you look at the data types here, we have one called DateTime and the other one DateTime 2. And if you look at the difference between these two, in terms of seconds, for DateTime 2, we have more precision. Okay. And we have also spoken about various other functions that are available in SQL Server to retrieve the current date and time. Okay, and we also have spoken about the UTC date and time concepts and time zone offset concepts in the previous session. So I strongly recommend to watch part 25 of this video series before continuing with this session. In this session, we'll talk about IsDate function. So IsDate function basically checks if the given value is a valid date, time, or date time. This function returns 1 for success and 0 for failure. Okay, so if you look at the way we are using this function, IsDate, you're passing in something to this function. In this case, we are passing in Prajim within single quotes. And look at this. Can we convert this Prajim into a valid date, time, or date time? We cannot. That's why this function returns 0, indicating that this is not a valid date and time. Okay, but on the other hand, if you look at the second example, this function is taking in another function, getDate, and we know that getDate function returns the current date and time. Okay, so as getDate returns a valid date and time, we are passing it to IsDate function to check, okay, is it a valid date time? Obviously it's a valid date time, so the function is returning 1 here. Okay, and this is a hard-coded date and time value. You have year, month, day, and then hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds, which is a valid date and time. So the IsDate function is returning 1. But on the other hand, look at the fourth example that we have here. It's a valid date as well. The only difference between the third and the fourth date is that with the fourth date, we have got more fractional seconds precision here. Okay, but then IsDate function returns 0. And if you look at the note here, for data type for DateTime 2 values, IsDate returns 0. Okay, and if you remember from the previous part, anything that has got the long precision for the seconds, it's a DateTime 2 data type. Okay, this is DateTime offset. Here also we have the long precision. Okay, so for these dates, IsDate returns false. So if you look at this example here, okay, IsDate, if we execute this, this returns 0. Okay, so keep that in mind. IsDate function returns 0 for DateTime 2 values. Okay, that's about IsDate function, and these are the examples. So obviously if we execute all of them together, so IsDate for Prajim returns 0, getDate returns the current date and time. It's a valid date, so it returns 1, and this is a valid date and time, so that returns 1, the third one. And finally this is a DateTime 2 data type date, so that's why IsDate returns 0 for that. Pretty simple to understand. Okay, so next we will talk about day, month, and year functions. These are very, very simple to understand. Obviously, the day function returns the day number of the month of the given date. So for example, if you look at the examples here, I have this getDate function. So obviously getDate returns the current date and time. So if you look at the current date and time on my machine, it is basically 1st of September 2012, so the day will return 1 here because getDate returns September 1st 2012. And if you look at this here, day where we have the hard-coded date, the date here is 31st of January 2012, so the day function returns 31. And if you look at the month, it returns the month number of the year. So obviously today is September 1st 2012, so month of getDate returns number 9 for September. And here this is January 31st 2012, so month function returns 1, which is very straightforward. And along the same lines, year function returns the year number of the given date. So getDate returns the current system date and time, so September 1st 2012, so year part is 2012, so this returns 2012, whereas the second one also returns 2012 because the year here is 2012. So basically, depending on which part of the date you want, you can choose either day, month, or year functions. Let's look at them practically real quick. So obviously, select getDate returns the current date and time. So this should return us 9. So that returns 9, and this should return 31 because 31 is the day. And along the same lines, today is September, so when we execute this, the first method call should return 9, and here the month value is hard-coded to first month, so it returns 1. And if you look at the year function, obviously this is 2012, September 1st 2012, so the first one returns 2012 and the second one returns 2012 as well because we have it hard-coded here. Alright, so that's about day, month, and year functions. DateName function, this is a very useful function. Okay, so DateName function basically returns a string. Okay, let's quickly prove that. So if you look at this here, select DateName. So if you look at the function itself, sorry about that. Okay, so select DateName. If you look at the function itself, this function returns an envar a string. Okay, now basically there are two parameters that this function expects. The first parameter is like which part of the date do you want? I mean, which part of the date do you want in string representation? Do you want the day or the weekday or the month? Okay, now look at this. I'm saying if you look at this second example specifically, I'm calling DateName function and I'm passing it weekday, as the argument for the first parameter, which is interval weekday, and then I'm okay, in this given date, tell me for the 30th of September 2012, what is the weekday? Is it a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday? Okay, so if you want to figure that out, you can use DateName function. So when I execute this one, it returns a Sunday. Similarly, if you want to find the name of the month, then you can pass month name for the interval. So basically, if you look at this DateName function, it expects two parameters. Okay, the second parameter is the date upon which this function will operate, and the first parameter, you use that parameter to tell which part of the date do you want. Okay, now this date part, look at this, the table here. For example, if I want weekday, I can use weekday, or I can just say DW. Now, is it mandatory to remember all these date parts and abbreviations? Not really. Okay, because if you just search MSDN, you get it. Okay, but then these are very easy to remember as well. For example, if you want the year part, you will just specify year. If you want the month, you will say month. If you want the day, you will say day. If you want the weekday, you will say weekday. They will give you an integer number. I mean, though this number is represented in a string format, it's a number, it's a day number. Okay, whereas if you want the weekday name, we use weekday. Similarly, you have several other date paths as well. For example, seconds, milliseconds, microseconds, etc. So depending on your requirement, you choose the appropriate date path. And I suggest to use the full date part rather than the abbreviation, because that will be clear. When you look at that, it's more readable rather than saying DY or QQ. Okay, so that's about date name. Now let's look at a very simple example of using this date name function. Okay, now in our database we have a very simple table. Select star from TBL employees. So if you look at this table, it has got just 3 columns: ID, name, and the date of birth. Okay, just like this: ID, name, and date of birth. Now what I want to do is we want to write a query which returns an output something like this. I want the name of the person, date of birth, and the day they are born on. Okay, are they born on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? So depending on their date of birth, you will have to calculate that. And I also want the month number. Is it 12th month, 9th month, 8th month, whatever? And the month name. Is it December, August, whatever? And basically the year. And obviously you would have guessed it by now how to write this query. We use the functions that we have just discussed. And if you look at the query, it's pretty simple. We want the name as it is, so we will say name, and then the date of birth as it is, we'll say date of birth. So that's pretty simple. Next, we want the day. Okay, the weekday. Is it a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? So I can use the DateName function, pass weekday for the date part parameter, and date of birth column. Work on date of birth. From the date of birth, find out what is the weekday and return that as day. Okay, and then next we want the month number. Okay, if you want the month number, in the previous session, in the previous slide, we have seen how to use the month function. That will give you the month number. Okay, so we are basically using that month function, and we are telling, okay, operate on date of birth column and return the month number. And similarly, I want the month name next, so I am passing in month as the date part for the date name function, and operate on date of birth and return the month name. And finally, I want the year, so we are using the year function, which is pretty simple. And we have that exact same query written here. So if you look at that, this is exactly the query that we have. And when we execute this query, you should see the output that we want. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.